Welcome, everyone. Happy to see you. It's been sunny earlier. It's kind of clouding up. I hope the sun comes back. I'm happy to have you all here and to introduce you to Natalie Arroyo. She's pretty well known around here, actually. I think we've seen her a lot. She lives in Eureka, California, and is an elected member of the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors representing District 4. She's worked on a wide range of watershed restoration, public health, and community organizing projects throughout the North Coast over the past 20 years. She's also a proud veteran and U.S. Coast Guard Reserve officer. She earned her Master of Science degree from Cal Poly Humboldt and is a lecturer in the Department of Environmental Science and Management. She previously served on the boards of the Salmonoid Restoration Federation, Humboldt Trails Council, and worked as an AmeriCorps member with the Mattole Salmon Group, right? Natalie also currently serves as a board chair of the Humboldt Transit Authority and as a board member of the Klamath Role Reversal Renewal Corporation, Redwood Region Economic Development Commission, Redwood Coast Energy Authority, and First Five Humboldt. She is passionate about watershed health, energy resilience, active adaptation, effective community engagement, and the relationship between people and place, particularly in rural and geographically isolated community settings. She's a very busy woman and she's very visible, so I'm sure you're happy to hear from her yet again. And she will tell you how she wants you to communicate. Welcome aboard, Natalie.
Thank
All
you so
yours.
much, Jane, and I really appreciate all of you being here today. Great, robust introduction. I'm happy to have folks pipe up and communicate with me verbally if you have a question or want me to stop for a second or repeat something. And you're also welcome to use the chat. I don't know if everyone, depending on what device you're on, it might be more convenient or not. But I know I sometimes process information more effectively when I can write my thoughts rather than speak them. So you're welcome to use that, and I can keep an eye on all of the above. And plus, I have helpers. So it's great to be with you all today. I'm going to go ahead and launch in, but I'm going to ask you a few questions in just a few minutes. So I will be giving you a chance to tell me a little bit more about what you'd like to gain from today's presentation. But I'll start with a few slides. That's what we're talking about today. I think we already know that. So I got a great introduction. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to add a couple more things about me. So I'm originally from Miami, Florida. I ended up in Humboldt, actually by way of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. So definitely did not plan to settle in Humboldt County originally, but I have come to love it here. And I have a long and interesting story about how I got here, but we'll save that for another day. I've spent thus far about 12 years in elected office. And in addition to that, though, really working closely through a lot of the other hats that I have worn in the past and continue to wear now with government. So, I want to emphasize that I've worked closely with, local government, at a really, small local level, working closely with all volunteer districts in our community, for example, all the way up to, continuing to work with the federal government. And I do continue to serve with the Coast Guard in a capacity as an officer. And, we're part of Department of Homeland Security, so that has been its own interesting experience over the last year. I also play roller derby. So if you're a fan of local athletics, come on out to a roller derby game. And I have a lot of fun doing that. I'm married to a wonderful person who we're both Cal Poly alumni, Jason LaPiccolo, and we live in Eureka with our two doggies. And hopefully you won't hear from them during this meeting, but it's possible. So they might pipe up. I'll try to minimize the distractions. So today I wanted to cover, it's a broad topic. So I wanted to cover a little bit about who makes what kind of decisions locally. If you all feel like you're really, really civically engaged and you want less of that and more of something else, I'd love to hear that from you. was going to talk a little bit about how to advocate effectively within the framework that local government operates within to make policy changes or recommendations about priorities. And maybe some of you even want to serve as an elected or appointed official. So I have a couple slides about that. But I want to really focus on your interests and questions. I don't think, because we're a fairly small group, I don't think we'll use breakout rooms today. But again, folks are welcome to use the chat. So I'd love to hear from you what you think you might want to hear more about when it comes to participating in local government decision making or community advocacy. What would be really beneficial to walk away knowing today? Even if it's really general, I'd love to hear from you. So let's take a few moments to just gather our thoughts, and then I'll call on people in person, and if you want to add to the chat, we'll go ahead and do that. I'm going to take a quick screenshot of this, and I'll drop the questions in the chat so that you can see it easily, but I'm going to stop sharing screen so that I can see you. So give me just 1 second to get that file dropped in there. I also do teach through the university. I teach online, so I get a lot of experience doing this. All right, do we have any brave volunteers who might like to verbally go first? Please, Marla.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for this conversation. I have been like literally begging. I'm a volunteer with AARP and I keep asking this question and they were not able to help in our area. So again, just so grateful for you today. So I've been here a couple of years on and off now. I come from New York City and San Diego. It's very obvious how to get involved in local advocacy, get a job, get a position on a board. Things are very clear in those larger spaces, but I feel like here it's a bit of a moving target. Like I sign up or I try to go attend a meeting just to get a vibe and see who's there and how I could engage more, and then the meeting times change or things happen that are less structured than I'm accustomed to. So any advice, hand-holding, any advice you would have about actually getting engaged on that level here, sitting on a board or a committee, or even virtually watching them for a while, building a reputation for being interested and having kind of niche genre, that kind of thing. I would be forever grateful. So that's where I'll start it off. Thank you.
Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, sometimes we can be a little bit of a hard community to break into. So I will definitely make sure we touch on that. Thank you. Kay asked, what's the most effective way to have our voices heard to us as supervisors? Methods of communication, snail mail, email, phone call, text, or at the public meetings? So I am going to just save all these to make sure I touch on them during the session today. So I'm not ignoring the questions. And then Barbara said, I live in Freshwater, feel I never have a say in anything, the change in processes at the school, dogs, speed limit changes, need a voice and mic isn't it. Okay, I will keep that in confidence. And that's a great question. If you live in the unincorporated part of the county, how do you have more representation? Wow, you guys are just asking the easy ones. real easy, straightforward questions. I love it. I really appreciate it. Any others that come to mind for folks here? All right. Oh, Lorraine, thank you. Do you know anything about quality of life for residents of group housing where behavioral health providers place their residents? Safety and oversight are issues we're addressing in Santa Clara County, or do you know who I might ask? That is a great question. Okay, these are a little more specific than I was expecting, but that's good. It's helpful for me to know what you really want me to spend time on. I will definitely touch on these. All right, well, we have until 1:30, so I'm going to try to pepper your questions into the other content that I prepared, and hopefully I'll do a couple of check-ins to see if what I'm sharing with you is meeting the mark and interesting or not. And please don't be offended, excuse me, the other one. Please don't worry about offending me. If if something is like, oh, this is a little too basic, please skip ahead. I often speak to groups in the community who I think have a lot of governance questions about how things work in the county. So I'm going to go into some of that. And when I stopped sharing my screen, I made it a little confusing for myself so let me just get back to where I was. All right. So this is some kind of level setting information to establish some baseline, understanding of what we're talking about. And Jane, I see Jane, thank you. You asked about messaging the entire board on the questions and comments we have here. And I assume by that you mean the Board of Supervisors. So I'll kind of lump that in with the questions about how best to communicate with the Board of Supervisors that was asked earlier too. So, boop. Looks like I got myself a little, okay, there we go. So I want to cover what kind of decisions are made at the local government level and who makes them. A lot of times people come to us and aren't really sure who their question's for. And I like to take a no wrong door approach and kind of point people in the right direction, or better yet, pass the question along to the expert, because a lot of times I'm not actually an expert. I'm a little bit of a jack of all trades. I know a little bit about a lot of things, just enough to probably point you in the right direction. So when you're asking what's the best way to communicate, for me personally, I will say email is phenomenal. And making it really clear that you'd like a response or you'd like someone who knows the answer to get in touch with you. Sometimes people just really want to share a lot of their feelings about things, and that's also welcomed. But I'm often surprised how often people communicate with me and I'm not actually really clear what they want. So if you can take a moment to really get clear on, like, do I want an answer from you? Do I want help finding the right person? That kind of thing is really helpful to, because we do get a lot of requests, and so then I can point folks in the right direction. So a lot of times I like to get questions and concerns by email because I can pass along or easily share it with other people who are part of my team. So we have elected or appointed officials at the city level, at the county level, within community services districts, and those often provide, water and wastewater services, sometimes roads and lighting. So communities like McKinleyville or Oric, Manila, a lot of the smaller communities and unincorporated communities often have a level of government called a community services district. We have school boards, of course, and we have many, many, many school boards in Humboldt County because we have lots of districts where, we'll turn to neighbors in other rural counties and go, how many school districts do you have? And they go, one or two. We have dozens. So that means that we need more people to make decisions for those organizations. Our community college district has elected officials, fire districts, and lots more. So at all these levels of government, there's things like, pay for employees, policies affecting your community, distribution of a lot of state and federal funds happens through the county in particular, but it also happens through our community partners at all levels of local government. So a lot of the other decision makers within this spectrum include the staff of the public agencies. They're really the subject matter experts, or members of boards or commissions. So they'll do things like decide how things like our countywide land use documents get applied. And a lot of times those decisions even happen at that committee or commission level, and they never even get to us. So sometimes it can be a little bit confusing. We have a lot of levels of local government and a lot of organizations that govern in what is a relatively small county, population-wise at least. Now, I'm not including sovereign tribal governments as, quote, local governments. For tribal citizens, of course, those are a level of local government, but they're also a sovereign separate nation, so I'm not really including them in this list. And then, of course, we have the state and federal government, which, of course, also have a really strong presence here because we have a lot of federal lands, a lot of coastal jurisdiction. And so understanding jurisdiction alone can be really challenging. Some tangible examples of what local government does, things like carrying out watershed restoration projects, maintaining and operating our community forests, all manner of water-related projects, affordable housing construction, deciding what should go where when it comes to land use, so zoning and land use, behavioral health efforts, and somebody asked about that, so I'll be sure to get back into that in more detail. Absolutely. So someone in the chat mentioned that the League of Women Voters have a yearly publication. I think it's called A Citizen's Guide to Local Government. I just went to the luncheon, the State of the Community luncheon, and that was distributed there. So it's a wonderful guide to seeing what all the different local government agencies in your area are. And even if you're really plugged into government, chances are you'll find some new ones in there. I know I always look through and I'm like, oh, that's right, there's a cemetery district here, or some other entity that has elected or appointed officials in charge of it. So just, a few tangible examples of what we do at the local government level. Jurisdiction really ultimately just refers to who has the legal power to make decisions in any specific place or area of interest. So for example, the city of Arcata will make decisions about roads within the city of Arcata. The county of Humboldt makes decisions about any roads that are outside of the city or outside of the private road system. And so those are totally, separate geographic areas most of the time. They do touch, and so that's when we have to cooperate. We also cooperate to realize savings, like, for example, we'll get a big paving contractor in here to do a ton of miles of road, and a lot of times all the cities in the county will work together to make that the most cost-effective that it can be. Another example is, County of Humboldt will issue permits to people for cannabis cultivation, for example, in the unincorporated part of the county, but the state also has overlapping jurisdiction there. So a lot of times there's a state process, a local government process, and sometimes even a city or other special district process, all layered on top of each other. So they might be distinct and separate, even though they're happening in the same geographic location. So I do understand that that can be tough for folks, and so again, I like to take like a no wrong door type of approach. Obviously you come in voting. I imagine everyone who signed up for this call is pretty politically engaged and likely to be a regular voter. Often our local elections are decided by a handful of votes. We just saw a tie in Blue Lake pretty recently. So it really does have an outsized impact in such a small community. I really do rely on a group of folks who advise me as mentors, essentially. Some of you may know Mary Jelena. She's a great mentor of mine. Karen Deemer, the former city manager of Arcata. Both people I turn to provide advice on a regular basis on all manner of issues, but I also have a small group of folks that are experts in different things that I turn to in areas where I'm not really the strongest. I have a strong background in a lot of areas, but I can't know everything. So that's one way that the public stays involved with me. Meeting with elected officials or staff about issues that are important to you. A lot of times people think we're too busy to meet with them. And while I would say my schedule is very packed, I really enjoy constituent meetings and hearing from folks on a one-on-one basis. And then of course, participating by providing public comment, items that are either on the agenda or not on the agenda. I will circle back around to that because that is one of the last touch points for policymaking, and it's fairly difficult to make substantive change at that, what I would consider the 11th hour, at the very end of the process. But there are other forms of feedback, petitions, signs, other ways of showing us what your opinion is. So I always encourage folks who want to work on a specific policy change to think about how to build collective power. In the past, I did a lot of community organizing around issues like public health or, a lot of different public health issues. One was rural isolation. So I worked with really highly rural communities to find ways that they were interconnected and could advocate for things and kind of increase their numbers by banding together with neighbors over a much larger geographic area than is often, thought of as a unit. So one example would be working with the community of quote Bridgeville, and some of you may think of Bridgeville as a very small, specific, discrete place, but the zip code and the school district and the area served by the Community Resource Center is about an 800 square mile area. So we defined that as the greater Bridgeville area and worked closely with folks all the way out Alder Point to the county line, near Mad River, and up to kind of the Carlotta area, and worked closely with folks around a number of changes they wanted to see in that community. And it was really knit together by the fact that Highway 36 was their main thoroughfare, for example. So I do encourage folks to develop a coalition based on either a topic of interest, geography of interest, or any kind of representation or identity elements. So the Humboldt Asian and Pacific Islanders in Solidarity Group is one that has really built a lot of power. The Peninsula Community Collaborative, comprised of folks who live in Manila, Samoa, and Fairhaven. And the Coalition for Responsible Transportation Priorities is another group who works really closely on policy change matters and keeps in touch with elected officials often around transportation issues. And then direct communication with us is quite powerful, and especially when people have taken the time to become informed or work in those collective groups. So a couple of other pointers before I get into more questions. And I see great. I see another question in the chat that's a little more specific, and I will definitely get in touch with you. So strategies that I think are most effective to make change, starting with, not forgetting that we're people in local government, myself excluded, because I make a pretty reasonable salary now. I would say a very good salary now. When I was on the city council for 8 years, throughout my 20s and early 30s, I got $500 a month on the Eureka City Council, and they're the best paid council around, to my knowledge. And it's something that could have easily been a full-time job. I was working full-time, and so were most of my colleagues. So we always had to have those trade-offs about whether we would go to and engage in a legislative conference or a meeting that happened during the day, or whether we had to go to work to pay our bills. So there's often that kind of trade-off that people are experiencing. I think there's a perception that people in government are there because they're making a lot of money, and most of the time that's really not the case. It's so a little, kindness goes a long way. I know it sounds a little cheesy, but it truly makes a difference. And you'd be amazed actually how many people call, leave a voicemail where they really cuss me out and then say, call me back. And I do. And they're often very surprised. So usually that's not the best way to start the relationship, but I understand that also people get heated and frustrated and take it out on, on whoever they can. So I get it, but a little basic community goes a long way. Trying to work closely with the government agency on a proposal before it comes to a vote. So this is one that I would like to really emphasize. If you are interested in an area that say the county or a city is going to take action on in the future, a great time to reach out is well before it comes to the dais. Because by the time it comes before us for a vote, there's usually a pretty binary choice, like yes, no, or maybe make a few modifications and then we can vote on it. That is the end of usually a month's long, possibly years long process. So, some of the organizations that I'll mention in a little while do a great job of staying engaged, listening in on the process, and then, checking to see what policy actions might be taken in the future, and seeing how they can provide input on those. I often encourage folks to inquire about how things came to be the way that they are. This is another one that is very powerful but infrequently used. Every once in a while I'll get an email or a voicemail, or someone will talk to me in person asking me how a quandary that they're noticing in the community came to be and what we might have tried in the past. And that's a very effective way of figuring out what to advocate for. Because in doing so, they're seeing, what have we tried? What are the sideboards? What are the limitations? And how did it come to be this way? What's the history behind this? It's very infrequent that people ask those kinds of questions, but it's, I think, very informative for everyone involved. And often, even in answering the question, I'll notice something that I hadn't noticed before. So those are very informative types of questions to ask. Whenever possible, when you're reaching out to government, especially if it's a rather prescriptive issue, try to solve it at the lowest level. A lot of times our agency staff are the subject matter experts. So sometimes people get a little bit offended when I pass them off to a staff person, but I try to always make it the warmest handoff I can. That, they're the ones that do this day in, day out. And like I said, I know a little bit about a lot of things. So, if it's a local municipal issue, try to see if that local municipal authority can handle it. Folks often also reach out to me at the county to say, hey, can you solve this problem at the city for me? And because of that matter of jurisdiction I talked about, while I can pass it off to the city, I'm not the decision maker there anymore. So we kind of have to do that little dance. If you're going to a meeting and you're interested to know how the process works, like what the culture of the meeting is, chances are good that you can watch footage of past meetings. There's a newly passed Senate Bill 707, easy to remember because it's our area code here, that prescribes more open meeting requirements and some changes to the Brown Act to make it easier for people to participate in public meetings and to require that remote participation be a possibility for more meetings. So that should make it even easier for folks to participate and to watch footage of past ones. And then lastly, on this slide, before I take a little breather and answer some more questions, is, I would say folks often throw around the idea that they might sue over something that they don't like. And I would just say, only say that if you really mean it, because a lot of times it stops the conversation. And if it's a, fairly legitimate threat of litigation, we'll pass it right off to our county counsel or city attorney or whoever the legal rep is for that organization so that they can, analyze that threat of litigation and decide how to proceed. So a lot of times that stops the conversation when people really use it to mean I'm very serious and I want you to pay attention to me. So I would say I'm very serious and I want you to pay attention to me instead, unless you'd really like to take it to court. All right. And the issue of homelessness and what has been done, future options. Okay, I'm going to add this to my list. Give me just 1 second. All right. I'm catching the drift that we want to talk about some specific county matters. So I'm going to switch gears. Let me just look at what else I had in mind for you. I can also share these slides with OLLI, and maybe they can, is there a way that you can share information like a PDF with the group?
Yes, if people inquire it,
Okay.
sure, you can send it to Ollie and or to me.
Okay.
And all you have to do is inquire it and I'll send it.
Okay. Okay.
So we can do that. I think it'd be really good to focus on what are there particular areas you would encourage us to be most effective in influencing issues, or, what about the protests? Have those been useful? Do you get feedback from those about what the issues are? I mean, the signs are a blast, but
Yeah, I get a I get a lot of joy out of seeing people participate in their democracy in all manner of ways. I'll say that. I am I am not sure how directly protest in this community has influenced policy outcomes. I will say that a lot of times it is invigorating for people, it's motivating, it's a shared bond, and I would encourage people to do it. But I think there are more effective ways to actually influence the outcomes. Now, I'm not saying not to protest, because of course, I think using your voice is important. And really underscoring that our freedom of speech and our constitutional freedoms are so important is meaningful. I was going to bring up a slide of a few advocacy and community building NGOs briefly, if folks are curious about them. There's so many in our community, so I almost hate to share a list because I'm sure I'm going to be leaving someone out. But let me take a moment to share a few that came to mind when I was putting this together. So community building and advocacy organizations, both non-governmental organizations and grassroots groups, everything from 350 Humboldt that does climate activism, indivisible groups and chapters that do activism around democracy. As I mentioned, the Coalition for Responsible Transportation Priorities, they work on safe walking, biking, and transit solutions. As folks may know, we have one of the highest per capita rates of injury and death to pedestrians and bicyclists in the state, and a very high level of DUI as well. But they're working on that, bicyclist and pedestrian safety issue. And they do a great job of looking at local plans and finding out where their policy priorities align with those, and then making very specific recommendations and working closely with us on those. So they're really, really good at doing that. Another group that's good at doing that, and they may not be aligned with everyone's, point of view, but Environmental Protection Information Center has a long history of working with environmental conservation-minded folks and advocating on a policy level. League of Women Voters puts out phenomenal information, brings people together to inform, so that also, supports democracy. We have local chapters for all political parties, not all, but many. And then, of course, there's service organizations like Seroptimist, AAUW, many, many, many more, Rotary, groups like that do some great work. And then, of course, nonprofits always need, folks to volunteer to be on their boards of directors and to participate in their governance on on an organizational level. So those are some ways to be really directly involved and use a lot of your, wisdom you've accrued over your lifetime to share with organizations that might be doing something you're passionate about. But I think the things that make the biggest difference, in my opinion, are when people do look at things like, for example, our county general plan that says how we will develop places in the future, and figure out if a project is proposed that they either support or oppose, how is it aligned or not with existing plans, and then give us that type of feedback. There's chances are, and this is a little bit more like, it requires a little bit more time and energy, but I think that's the type of feedback that when it's presented to us, it's the most actionable, and it's really golden to have that type of input. 350 Humboldt do a really good job of that, of looking into, and comparing what proposals are here to what has happened in other communities, or researching climate impacts of certain actions and letting us know. And that's kind of what in the military we would call a force multiplier. It's like we only have, 10 people, but if we have 10 more people doing research and informing these first 10 people, then we have, 20 minds working on the same issue. It's that same kind of thing. So I think that is what I find the most applicable and useful when it comes to community input, but not everyone is kind of wired that way or wants to give that type of input. So I also think just coming out and telling us any way you want, whether it's in public comment or by a phone call or a postcard or an email, what you think of a proposed action is great. Now, a lot of times what ends up on our agenda, and this is something that many people don't know, what ends up on any agenda is going to be visible to the members of that elected body at the same time as it is the general public. So for example, I'm the vice chair of the Board of Supervisors right now. If we follow our regular process next year, I will be the chair. And so as the chair, I would have the opportunity to see the agenda a couple of days before the public, only to figure out if there are any process issues with the agenda, anything that we might have a reason to arrange differently on the agenda, things like that. It's not to speak to the content of what's going to be talked about. It's just to look at how we might move things around. And so right now, my colleague Mike Wilson does that. He's the chair, and he figures out like what the meeting order is going to be and things like that. So none of us get to see all that info before the general public. That's true of cities as well. So sometimes we'll know kind of what's generally coming down the pipe. Like I know that in May, we're going to have budget hearings, but I don't know exactly what all the departments are going to present as part of their budget. So I think that's often surprising to people that we don't know that before everybody else does. And that's meant to, kind of level the playing field. All right. So I see some more specific questions and I'm going to jump into them. How's everybody doing? Can you give me like a thumbs up or a little wave if you're not asleep? Hope I'm not boring everybody.
No, you aren't.
Okay.
Not to worry.
Okay. All right. I know sometimes when not a lot of folks have their screens on, it's a little bit like, is
It's
everyone
hard to tell, isn't
hard to
it?
tell how you're doing, but that's okay. All right.
Kay, are you trying to say something? You're
Hi, Kay. Kay's just letting me know she's here. Thanks, Kay. I appreciate all y'all. All right, so I'm going to go and pepper some of these questions in. I have a couple of slides about running for office that I'm going to skip, but if anyone really wants to either run for office or be appointed to a position, chances are good that many of you have been appointed to advisory positions in the past, but if anyone's interested in that and wants more detail, I always encourage folks to reach out to me. I'm going to put my email in the chat so you all just have it handy and can ask me questions anytime you'd like. And again, I'll share those slides with Jane so that if anyone wants to request them and look over them later, you can. All right, so county questions. Let's go for the easy one. Comment on the issue of homelessness and what has been done and future options. Okay, so right now, our board has an ad hoc committee working on, and I'm not on it. So an ad hoc committee is comprised of usually two people, or one board of one supervisor and one, and perhaps some staff or other elected officials. This one is comprised of two supervisors working with our staff. So they're going to be talking about whether there's a way to both increase options for folks to have transitional housing services short term and increase enforcement. I have not found that approach to be particularly effective in Eureka in the past, so I was the lone dissenting vote on that, actually. We haven't found enforcement to be very feasible, and while it might seem easy on the surface to tell people you can't sleep here, it's been a bit of a litigation quagmire. And if you don't have a place for that person to go that truly meets every one of their needs, that includes, medical needs and ADA resources and perhaps somewhere for their pets to go, and somewhere that really is aligned with their values, then the chances are pretty good that you can get yourself into a legal quagmire, amongst other things, not to mention the sort of moral issues involved. And so what I've focused on and what the county is focusing on now are ways for people who have a lot of challenges with staying housed or getting housed to get housed. And that is very, very, very resource intensive. So we have a lot of folks who have everything from housing vouchers to help make housing more affordable, to people who need to be in like a permanent supportive housing, which is type of housing where there's staffing and people there all the time to help supervise the folks and make sure that they are reminded to take medications and do things like that. And so a lot of times that's for people with pretty significant behavioral health needs. And behavioral health refers to both mental health and behaviors like substance use or other behaviors that might be impacting people's well-being. So those are really resource intensive programs, and we've expanded those pretty substantially. We have another 30 beds within the last year and a half than we had before. 30 doesn't sound like that many, but when you think about the number of folks that you see on the street who you might see over and over and over again, a lot of times it's a lot of the same people who live in this community and kind of are most visibly in distress. And so where possible, we're getting folks into that system. There are some new options through the courts to, usually it's voluntary, it's for people to seek treatment, but they have to be consenting. And then there are a few ways that people can be court ordered to seek behavioral health care without their consent. And that's usually when they're in severe crisis or they're at a risk to themselves or others. So those are some things that we're doing. We're expanding those permanent supportive housing facilities and transitional kind of behavioral health beds because we do know that we have a lot of folks who are unhoused who've been unhoused for many years and have co-occurring medical and mental conditions. So that is the reality. And those people are, I'll be honest, really challenging to serve. I do see, and gone are the days where we could sort of lock people up and throw away the key. I don't think anyone in this room is recommending that when it comes to mental health, but there's a reason why it's very hard to require people to seek treatment. I think it's the pendulum swung all the way one way in the past, and now we're trying to kind of figure out that middle ground. So that was around, behavioral health, and there's some exploration of short-term encampment areas. Those have also been very tricky to administer in the past and actually very costly, but continuing to explore that. I saw a question about the quality of life for residents of group housing where behavioral health providers place residents. And I will say I've heard a couple of instances of safety and oversight being issues. Mostly what we hear from, what I hear about is landlords who rented to a client of the Department of Health and Human Services who did have not a strong history of being housed and then did damage to the place, and then we provide like a guarantee for landlords. But sometimes that's a little bit tricky, those programs. Like if a landlord discontinues their participation or a client discontinues their participation. So we're working through some like boring but important legal issues there. So that's one example. I think there's an increasing number of affordable housing complexes in Humboldt. I'm very, very happy to see that. And I've been really working hard at making sure there's more affordable housing here, including affordable by design apartment complexes where, a unit is always intended to remain affordable over time. There are, sometimes when you're serving particularly people who have been homeless before, and that is not to say that all affordable housing is for people who have experienced homelessness, but when you do have some people who have experienced homelessness, sometimes there's other co-occurring challenges. So in short, I would say sometimes safety is an issue or having enough services on site is an issue. Most of those complexes are not like staffed 24/7 by someone who's meant to provide social work services, for example, but they may be. So that when we have a number of clients with higher needs there, sometimes we have like a social worker assigned to go check in on people. All right, so a question about the most effective way to have our voices heard. I would say that varies by person. So I know, for example, my colleague Rex Bone, a lot of people have his personal cell phone number and they call or text him, and that works well for him. I find that method of communication really overwhelming, and I like to, frankly, keep a little bit of a barrier between my work life and my home life. I need that to be able to be sane. So I really love email. I do get back to people when they leave me voicemail. Sometimes it takes a day or so. And, so I think each of us are different. Like I said before, when people email us, sometimes it's easiest to get them the answer from someone else, to connect them to the right person. So that's really what I would suggest. And then whenever I get a handwritten letter in the mail, I really take the time to read it. I love receiving handwritten mail, so that's always welcomed too. One of the things that's least effective is like a petition type email where everyone's sending the same email and I get like 400 emails saying the same thing. I usually try to steer people away from those because after a while, it sort of just gums up the works of me communicating. And I do see that a lot of people have sent the same thing, but I can't say that it really has the desired impact. So I would encourage folks to take the time to write a personalized message about an issue. So for example, when the article came out about Amazon moving forward with proposing a warehouse on private property up by the airport. I didn't get any of those like chain emails. A lot of people though reached out on a one-on-one, one-to-one kind of basis and said, here are my concerns or what can be done. And a lot of those questions were really thoughtful and allowed me to kind of engage with whatever the person's real question was rather than kind of a canned response. All right. What responsibility do we have for trying to address the loss of federal funding? We are, and is there room in the budget, or are we already in distress? That's a great question, Jane. I would say we stand to lose more funding. We stand to lose funding when it comes to healthcare coverage, and part of that is additional prescriptive requirements that are going to take us more, we're going to require more staff time from the county to be able to meet those requirements. But also we think many of our clients who receive Medi-Cal, for example, may not be able to meet some of the new administrative documentation requirements. For example, HR 1, the federal bill, requires that that people work a certain number of hours per month or volunteer a certain number of hours per month. In and of themselves, those requirements aren't hard to meet, and most of our recipients already are meeting those. But because of, for example, seasonality of work, like I was just talking to someone the other day who is a raft guide in the summer and then does dog sitting and does a number of other things to piece together work. And that kind of story is very common for people in our community, especially like younger people and individuals who receive these services. So just documenting that is going to take a lot of extra work, and sometimes they don't have the documentation they need. So they'll, everyone's going to need to do more administrative work. So that increased the county's costs. We also know that we're going to be receiving fewer funds in our region for housing vouchers for Section 8. So that's, a lot of those programs are keeping people housed who would otherwise not be able to find housing. So we're going to have a big impact from that. So I would say the responsibility we have is saying very loudly to our elected representatives at the state and federal level that these are impacts that are felt even more in our rural community than they may be in bigger communities, although they'll be felt everywhere. And we're doing that. So I'm going to a legislative conference in just a couple weeks in Sacramento where I'm going to meet with everybody. And my colleague Mike Wilson just got back from Sacramento, where he met with, not only state reps, but also federal reps while they were on recess. So we do that. We have a lobbyist who works for the county and also helps to make our voice heard. The county is working with developers to build low-income housing in some places. We have worked on a public-private partnership to do that in a couple in McKinleyville. I would say we could do more. When I was at the city, we worked really hard to identify sites for low-income housing and help pave the way for that to be easier. And now we're starting to see the fruits of that. And it took 4 or 5 years. So we really need to be moving in that direction. There's not a huge amount of funding for those programs other than programs that are already in the queue or might be considered shovel ready or ready to go might be really competitive for tax credits, but that's one of the few mechanisms that's really robust still. That includes federal funding. So there's certainly some state funding, but the governor's budget for this year makes some cuts to housing and homelessness programs as well because the state budget is just smaller, going to have to be smaller this year. So we're seeing decreases in funding. Yep, the state is probably not going to be able to replace the federal funding losses because we're having our own state budget crunch, and the county is too. So maybe not the most hopeful message in the world, but it's the real message. Okay.
So what's really required? Do we really have to try to get citizens together, people with more assets and to be more donate more to solve some of these problems? I mean, can we set up special committees to try to solicit funding to address these?
I would say everyone's sort of feeling the hurt equally in the nonprofit sector, in the private sector, in the government sector. A little bit of a pinch is happening everywhere, except in the AI sector. So maybe we just need AI, companies to fund all these things. I'm just kidding. There are very few places where this pinch and contraction isn't being felt, I would say. So it's a little hard to say, oh, we should get this group of people to finance these organizations so that we don't have losses. I think we're really in a time of trying to figure out how we can comply with, for example, the requirements of HR1 around healthcare. The implementing guidance from the federal government hasn't even really been issued to the states. So we know it will impact us, but we don't have all the details in place yet. So there's a little bit of just instability that we're being faced with that means that we can't always connect the dots and figure out what the belt tightening is that we need to do. And so that keeps everyone a little bit off balance. So I know that's not a great answer to your question. I just don't know what the most effective way to funnel resources is right now. I think, that might not be the most satisfying answer, but it's the best one I have at this moment. I would say, people in this community really look out for each other. Organizations like Food for People provide really direct support to folks who need it. There are a lot of direct service organizations that are always good to give to and are filling gaps and will probably continue to fill gaps. But when it comes to support for some of these very expensive programs to keep people housed, for example, I'm not sure we're going to be able to get the community fundraising in place to really fill that gap. Some of it is going to have to be creative reallocation of money between programs on the county side. All right, I see a
I
question.
added a question about voting in the fall.
Sure, go ahead.
Are we prepared to address the possibility of federal interference? And if so, how?
That would be a really good question for me to ask of our registrar of voters and our sheriff. I have not had that conversation yet, so thank you for posing that. I talked to the Eureka chief of police about whether, because I just we happened to run into each other recently and talk about this, about, additional staffing for polling places. And we talked about striking that balance between not making people afraid to come to the polls, particularly people who've had a bad history with law enforcement or just scared when they see law enforcement, and making people feel that they're safe to come to the polls. Now, because we have a really strong vote by mail process here, that is also helpful. But as we saw in Riverside County, we saw the seizing of ballots, now after they were already counted. But so, I think I'll have to have a conversation with the registrar of voters and sheriff about what steps they're taking, what exact steps. But, law enforcement are aware that they intimidate some people and make others feel safe. So I think they have to kind of find the right distance from the polls. Okay, Jane, I'm going to grab a couple other questions and I'm going to come back to yours in just a moment.
Sure.
So the person who lives in Freshwater, I will say, if you feel that your one county supervisor is not as responsive as you would like, and this applies to anyone anywhere in the county, it's always okay to loop in another supervisor. A lot of times people feel that they have not great personal history with one or another supervisor, and they'll loop me in, and it applies to all my colleagues and peers on the board. Sometimes they'll just say, I just want someone else to hear this or point me in the right direction. And sometimes, we all do think about things differently. So sometimes I'll think of a solution that one of my colleagues didn't. So even if it's not like this person didn't help me, it doesn't hurt to tag someone else in. When you live in an unincorporated part of the county, that is one challenge, is that, you don't have as many forms of government representing you. I know I particularly face this with residents of Samoa, because even though they're in the unincorporated portion of the county, and they have, myself and the Peninsula Community Services District as their local government representatives, they live in an old company town managed by a private developer. So they have an interesting situation where all the roads are privately maintained, the sewer and wastewater and water infrastructure is privately maintained, and yet they're within the county's jurisdiction. So we always have this little balancing act to do with the property owner, of a lot of that infrastructure. And then as the individual properties are being sold, the private property owners, a lot of them moved from out of the area and are new to the community. So we kind of have to find that balance. And there aren't very many company towns left. So we don't have a lot of examples to look to. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but I would say feel free to tag me in if you have a question or an issue. And sometimes people do live in the unincorporated, more rural parts of the county because they like less governance, and there's both an upside and a downside to that. So sometimes people prefer that, and they want to manage their own affairs with their neighbors, and until they get into neighbor issues, and then they want some help. So we do our best with the different departments that we have, whether it's public works or code enforcement. That's one department that has a big backlog, but we're working through some code enforcement issues as well. Great.
How does the current continued government shutdown impact our area? If so, what is the impact?
Yes, I do see that. Thank you. Yeah, I would say, so the government shutdown, so being in the Coast Guard, I will say, I work closely with a lot of Coast Guard civilians who just today were brought back into their positions. So people who had been furloughed, they are getting paid this week for the first time in 2 months, and these are civilians, not Coast Guard active duty members. But they do a lot of important work for the Coast Guard, and I would argue some of the most important work, actually. A lot of the environmental resources folks that I've been working with out of Coast Guard headquarters are coming back to work today. Our community did have some Department of Homeland Security civilian employees who were impacted, but not very many. So the government shutdown that we're in right now has been, Department of Homeland Security, which includes FEMA. So I also have worked closely with FEMA Region 9 over the years, and they're based in San Francisco. Those folks have been furloughed without pay. There's very few of them who were required to continue working without pay. So some of them, got time off, but also didn't get paid. And then some of them kept working and didn't get paid. So I would say it has a regional impact that's pretty significant, but probably only a handful of people that I know of locally who are Department of Homeland Security who've been furloughed. So now they're all working, and I just heard today that we'll likely keep getting paid through May 15th, but we'll see, because the bag of cash they found somewhere is not endless. So let's see. Okay, one more question that I saved from earlier in the chat. Let's see. Oh, Marla, your first question about it being harder to connect. I think a lot of if you find an organization or a cause that you're really interested in, I do think and I've often had to do this, like show up and find someone who seems like they know what's going on and ask them to be sort of your guide. And maybe you've already tried that, but I recently had someone move here and say I'd like to get more plugged into the community, and here's where I live. And it was a place that it was in Petrolia, where I had also lived in the past. And that's such a rural place that they had found it especially hard to connect with people. And so they asked me to sort of just take them under my wing and tell them what I knew about the community and who I knew. I haven't lived there in almost 20 years, so it was a little hard, but I did manage to connect them to some people. And so that I think so much of the community here is relational, and we're not always great at following our own established processes, as you've found. So sometimes people will say there's a meeting and then the weather's nice and people all go do something else. So I think it's very relational, and it's very it's definitely not the same kind of vibe of the East Coast, that's for sure. I don't know if that was very helpful, but you're welcome to. I see that you asked a question also about guidance around like timing, perhaps to send an email or meet to discuss local issues.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I really want to get that timing right so that I can, kind of pick your brain on all of these things, the who and the where and the when, but I don't want to do it when you're like in budget season. I know
Yeah,
enough
yeah.
to know there are times
Oh,
not
great.
to do that to you.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, our budget season really kicks off in like mid-May, and then through, we are on the state budget cycle, so our fiscal year starts July 1. And in local government, most
Oh, I didn't know. I
agencies,
thought it
yeah.
was federal with October. I did not know
No.
that. Okay,
Well, the
thank you for
federal, yeah, we don't align with the federal
Got it.
calendar though. So May to June are really the the peak of budget season. That said, I meet with departments about their budgets, and we have special presentations and some extra meetings about that. But really, a lot of that work happens at the department level. Um, on our board, we really put a lot of trust in our departments, both because we have a lot of elected department heads, and this is something maybe I should have mentioned. We have, an elected sheriff, an elected auditor controller, an elected clerk recorder, district attorney. And so all of those people, I don't supervise them. I don't know. I think it's obvious to some people, but not others, that I don't direct the sheriff, for example. He's elected by the people, and he definitely lets me know that I don't direct his actions. So we all have to, again, with the sort of relationalness, we have to figure out how to develop those relationships and reach out to each other. And sometimes it's more effective than others with different department heads. And then we have a lot of appointed department heads, and we try to give them as much autonomy as possible, especially because they have so many elected peers. So we try to bring them to even though we direct their actions technically, we try to let them have a similar level of autonomy, so that one department isn't feeling like they have, someone looking out for them who's an elected official who doesn't answer to the Board of Supervisors, while another one, feels those impacts more greatly. But I would say, Marla, as far as reaching out, a lot of times, a lot of times I can meet in the afternoons. Um, I will say Juliana is on the call and she's interning with my office right now. She's just listening in today to hear what I have to say about all this. But so she knows that a lot of times my afternoons are a little bit more free than mornings for my schedule. And really, any time is fine, and I'll get folks plugged in. I think if every single one of you wanted to have a one-on-one meeting, it might be it might take a couple months, but feel free to really send me something and ask, and we can get into specific questions.
Grateful. Thank you so much. I'll be in touch.
Yeah, that sounds great. Status of proposed wind farm and aquaculture and how we can make these projects happen. So the proposed wind farms, the leases are still technically being honored. We've seen a lot of dynamism and chaos within the offshore wind industry. We did see some federal decisions that I think are being appealed, requiring that leases be honored because the federal government already kind of executed certain documents and took a fairly large amount of money from leaseholders for these federal offshore wind sites. So we have 2 off of Humboldt County's coast, 3 on the central coast, 3 different lease areas that are in federal waters, and then quite a few on the East Coast, including some wind farms that are already operating. And one of the bidders on the Humboldt offshore wind area, Vineyard Wind, is also present and operating a wind farm offshore on the East Coast. So they have a lot of experience with kind of going through all of these twists and turns. Meanwhile, the Port of Humboldt Bay is working on a project to develop a port project that would support that industry and other industries that require really heavy duty industrial facilities on the waterfront. So a heavy lift marine terminal. So I think some people may be very familiar with this, some may not, but because all of the proposed port improvements are within my district, even though the Harbor District has its own elected board of commissioners, because they're in the unincorporated part of the county within my district, I was really have been plugged in on offshore wind. So I felt like I was spending, sometimes a quarter of my time every week paying attention to and learning about offshore wind stuff. So I would say it continues to evolve frequently. The California Energy Commission and other state agencies have given the Harbor District quite a lot of funding to get the ball rolling on the permitting and planning and design components of the project that needed to happen, as well as some community benefits that will come from the project. So things outside of the direct impact of the project, but that can be beneficial to the neighborhoods around or the greater community, and folks like fishing sector and aquaculture. So they're working through that. There's a big proposition, Prop 4, and that generated funds, bond funds from the state, and there's going to be a couple $100 million going split between Humboldt Bay and Long Beach for port improvements. So we're hoping to see additional investment here. And I would say that, again, that port facility can be used for things in addition to the offshore wind sector. But, we've gotten all kinds of harebrained scheme requests for industrial uses of our port. Some of them are reasonable and some of them are a little out there. So there's lots of interest in our developable port land. So that's good, I guess. I would say this community has voiced strong opinions in the past about what we want to see our port used for or not used for, so I'm sure that will continue. When it comes to aquaculture, we did see Nordic Aqua Farms has basically entered the bankruptcy process, not just domestically, but also in Europe. So they weren't able to make that business model work, and they're slowly kind of extricating themselves from the project on the peninsula that they were working towards, but they do have, they did go through with a lot of the permitting and a lot of the environmental documents that are time consuming and costly to complete, and those are still there. So there's hope that that can still be used for an aquaculture facility, perhaps of a different kind. There's some seaweed aquaculture that's growing in popularity here on the North Coast. And there are actually several tenants for seaweed aquaculture sites that are interested in moving in, possibly some other aquaculture sites. There's a big salt maker. I don't know if folks know that, but Pacific Salt, flake salt out there. They have a pretty robust business in making salt. So we'll see. I think there's still potential there. Let's see. Making sure that I didn't miss any other questions.
Have
Ah,
we been visited by ICE?
oh, yes. And I'm going to go back to Rowitas in a second. Um, we have been, okay, well, we have been visited by ICE, but not not more than we were before. So ICE has always come from, they have an office in Reading. They have come and waited outside the courthouse in the past for public court proceedings. So when there are certain types of crimes, they can be adult, they have to be an adult and usually a serious or violent crime. The proceedings aren't, unless there's some reason for them to be confidential because of protecting victim information, they're usually public. So when those sentencings happen and someone's leaving the courthouse, they can be picked up by federal agents. That has always been the case. And so even if the county doesn't participate in that process, that is public information. And so they know that and monitor it. And sometimes they're looking for a specific person. And so they have taken them. Those are usually isolated incidents. I have heard, and I don't know the particulars, but I've heard from some reputable sources in the community that there are folks from Humboldt who have gone for immigration appointments in San Francisco and been detained there. And so I've heard of a few instances of that. But that didn't take place here. It took place at a immigration related appointment.
So they haven't been going through the streets.
No. And there's several groups that are monitoring that and providing like verification and then reaching out to community members if people think they are seeing any federal officers. In the past, it's been like a plainclothes, like game warden type person or other types of law enforcement that have been mistaken for that agency. Yeah. So, okay. I see the question about with many wonderful groups in our area, I find it difficult to fit some in. Is there, I hear you. I'm only laughing because I have that same problem. Is there someone in the county that can simulate a calendar for the year that could show regular meetings so other groups can plan events that don't conflict? Whew, you're
Good thought.
speaking my language. I I'm constantly like, we just planned the Humboldt County or the Humboldt Trails Summit, which is usually an annual event, and it's going to be May 30th, incidentally, but only to come to find out that there were a couple other events that same day, like the Forest Moon Festival, which is like a Star Wars festival that we have here. So I don't know if it's possible either for like fun events or public meetings to always get this right. I will say that, does anyone have this written up? That's a great question. Is there anyone here from the League of Women Voters? Not to put you on the spot, but I wonder if their guide has the dates that people meet. Okay, you don't?
No, but years and years ago, 100 years ago, uh, somebody did that, and I thought it was the Chamber of Commerce. And I contributed a number of our planned events so that that could be put in the mix. So if we had a single point where people could, the things that they have actually scheduled, that they could report that, and then it could just be a list online and people could access to see what's going on May 30th. And you would know, oh gosh, there's already 6 things happening that day. We better find a different date. I
Yeah.
don't know enough about who could coordinate that or not, but it would be a real service. This weekend I had company from out of town, and there were three major events we all wanted to go to.
Yeah, yeah. It's
It
tricky. I
would be
mean,
a big service and help the groups that are doing the event as well, because you don't
yeah,
want other events cutting in on your resources. That's all.
agreed. Yeah, thanks, Kay. I think so. I hear a few potential threads here. One of them is I just popped in the chat the Humboldt counties Humboldt.gov, type calendar, and that shows like just our meetings, not just our board meetings, but like Behavioral Health Board, Human Rights Commission, Fish and Game Commission, all of those boards and commissions within the county that are operated by or administered by the county take up a lot of this calendar. So just ours take up a huge amount of space. So those are available on the county's website. Then community calendars, I often look at the North Coast Journal and Lost Coast Outpost community calendars for events to see if there's conflicting stuff. Visit Humboldt also maintains an okay one when it comes to like big recurring events, like when I want to remember like when's Oyster Fest, things like that. And then, but I think what I also hear you saying is that maybe things like city council meetings or community service district meetings might be helpful. Was that what you were kind of thinking,
Yes.
Rhoda?
Uh, well, I missed the League of Women Voters meeting this week because the pioneers always meet on the second Friday of the month. And we're planning our huge event for May the 8th. And so I had to be there. And I've missed a couple of things because the California retired teachers and they have meetings and they're usually scheduled ahead of time. And if we could have things like that on there, so when people want to plan, like last year, the Alzheimer's and the oh, what was the other one? Oh, the music festival. They conflicted one year. And so I know Lynn McKenna is now making sure that she's involved in both too. They don't conflict. So those are the problems. But if we had the major events that are scheduled on a calendar, then we can plan other events around it.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
I hear that. I often yeah, I often have event overload. I mean, one thing I can just say is that we're such an active community. It might be a little hard to break in, but once you break in, it's like, wow, now there's 1 million things all the time. For such a small population, we really know how to have some galas and do some fundraising and do some meeting and talk about, good causes. So I think it's an ongoing challenge. I've never found one master calendar that's perfect, so I usually have to check three or four. And when it comes to when different, I have a little, um, what would I call this? It's an elected officials support group. It's me, and of course we don't violate the Brown Act, so it's only two people or fewer from each board, but it's like me and two Eureka City Council members and two Arcata City Council members and a couple people from McKinleyville and a couple people from different jurisdictions, even one from Willow Creek. And we get together and just talk about what it's like being an elected official in Humboldt County and shared challenges. And I find it very valuable because we end up comparing notes about what are you working on? Oh, what are you working on? And we kind of gripe a little bit. So that group struggled to find a time to meet because different boards meet on different evenings. So we've landed on Thursday evening, and unless people have a special meeting, that's been okay because we have like Tuesday night for Eureka, Wednesday night for Arcata, Monday night for Willow Creek. So it's even that is just its own
Right.
challenge. Yeah.
But yeah, even if there was just a county calendar where people could call in if they had an event and it could be put on that county calendar coming up for the Alzheimer's, the music festival. I know that's all on there. But if there was one calendar where and people knew where to go to put their event listed, that would help other people that are planning events.
Yeah, I will say we've kind of allowed that to be the local media that tries to drive that. But the North Coast Journal's calendar is pretty thorough, and the Last Coast Outpost. So I'll take it under consideration and tell our public information officer.
Well, it's just looking ahead,
Yeah,
and
it's
that's just
hard.
for the week ahead. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and then, so many of you are probably involved in service organizations and causes that that I also care about. And I struggle, I don't know if y'all do, with all the fundraisers. At one point I thought, maybe we could do like a mega fundraiser where you just bill me like a few $1,000s a year and then I'm done. Not, but that doesn't really accomplish the goal of going and supporting. So I do go to as many community events as I know about and can make it to. And so I encourage you, if you're involved with organizations that are doing a big community event and you want to let me know about it, it's one of those things where sometimes I don't hear about it, just like we're talking about today. So feel free to reach out to me with those two, and I'll see if I can make it.
well, our pioneers are having theirs on May the 8th at the Eureka Women's Club, and it's
Okay.
yeah, open at 11 and celebrating 150 years as the oldest historical organization. So there we are.
Very cool. Very cool. Great. I think I got to everything I saw in the chat. We have 6 minutes till 1:30. Is there anything else that's coming to mind for folks? I know some of the news was a little bleak, but it's just how it is.
Oh, I think you did a great job, Natalie. Thank you ever so much. I mean, we always have questions and we don't know how to find answers many times. And it's very helpful that you could do this and let people have an idea of what we're dealing with.
Yeah, thanks. Um,
And
well,
for
I
the
saw a
future,
question from Barbara that was more directly just to me. Feel free to reach out to me. If I saw that you sent me or put your email in here too, but let's connect. And if anyone has things that you didn't feel comfortable asking for the group and you want to reach out, always feel that you can.
thank you. And to let you know that next week on Monday, we're going to have a discussion of the institutional evolution of OLLI and Cal Poly Humboldt with Shauna Young, the interim provost of Cal Poly. We've had a lot of changes. We have a new president, we have new faculty, we have new tech, we have new programs, new buildings, and new leadership. So we're going to be talking, a number of these are going to participate, and we welcome you to come and learn about what's going on at Cal Poly and OLLI. We always have change, of course. We've got a lot lately, so
Yeah,
everybody's
yeah,
trying to adjust to that too, but it's helpful to know what's going on.
yeah. Thank
So
you.
you
Yeah,
are welcome to join us next week as well. And Natalie, thank you ever so much.
appreciate your time, everyone. Thank you.
Have
Have
a
a good
great
one.
week.
All right, take care.